Is retirement planning biblical, or should Christians plan for retirement? That's what we're talking about today. But first, my name is David Sandu. I'm a financial advisor, and at Brighter Wealth, I help Christians become brighter stewards of God's wealth. So the question for today, should Christians plan for retirement? I'll say yes and no. I think the traditional views of retirement are kind of a newer concept, and not necessarily from a biblical perspective. In fact, the only time that retirement, or the version of retirement, is mentioned in the Bible is referring to the Levites in the Levitical priesthood. They were able to, at the age of 50, able to pass down and should have not been in service any longer. So that's the only version of retirement that we kind of see in Scripture. So when we take a biblical worldview on retirement, I always say that there's three different frameworks that we can look at: our work, our ministry, and our calling. The traditional view of retirement I think about is when Jesus talks about the parable of the man who builds storehouses. The parable that Jesus talks about is there's a man who has a field, who's building storehouses to store all of that, his possessions. Well, what he does is he says, I'm happy, I'm going to take it easy now. I'm going to build bigger storehouses. But Jesus, says basically that this man was a fool, that his life was going to be required of him that night, because he's laying up all this worldly and earthly possession. So I don't think necessarily that we should take this approach where we're just living for retirement and we're focusing on that. So in the framework of our work, our ministry, and our calling, I want to talk first about our work. When we think about our work, a lot of times people aren't necessarily happy about the work that they're doing. But I want to flip it on its head and talk about Colossians. Colossians says that whatever you do, work heartily as unto the Lord, because he will give you your just reward and inheritance. So when people think about work, you shouldn't really think about it as a burden, and actually there's another scripture that talks about those who don't work shouldn't eat. And also those who don't provide for their own family have denied their faith and are worse than an unbeliever. So work should be viewed as a blessing. So a lot of times when I work with my clients, they think about work initially as a burden, and then they're so looking forward to retirement because they're retiring from something, meaning they're trying to just leave work, get out of work, instead of really retiring to something, which I believe is our ministry. So that's the second part of this of these pillars: our work, our ministry, and our calling. So first, our work should be viewed as a blessing. Second, our ministry. Because we are disciples of Christ and we're believers, we should not be looking at work as a burden. We should be looking at work as an opportunity for ministering God's grace. We should be looking at work as, how can we bless those people that are in our lives, our coworkers, the customers that we serve? How can we use our work as our ministry? A lot of times this might be called faith in the marketplace, or business as ministry, or marketplace ministry. But really all of those terms just refine the way that and define the way that we view work, meaning not as a place to just go work from 9 to 5 and get paid, but as an opportunity to be ministers of the gospel of Christ. So our work, our ministry, and finally our calling. Again, I mentioned a lot of times when I first meet with Christians, they're focused on retirement planning and looking at it as a way to retire from something, meaning their work. But I always say that, our work and our ministry never stop, because God has placed a call on our life. And that's the third pillar here, our calling. Whether you're in work full-time for as a ministry, meaning you're a pastor, or you serve in a pastoral capacity at a church, or you work in the marketplace, we all have a calling on our life, which is to be ministers of the gospel, to be sharing the message of Jesus with other people. And that's really our true calling in this world. But a lot of times we have an opportunity to serve and steward that calling in a different capacity. So it might be work, it might be full-time ministry, but it also might be an encore career. That's why I said a lot of times you shouldn't be thinking about retiring from something. I think a more biblical perspective is retiring to something, meaning this is going to be the encore career that God's called me to. So maybe you're getting close to age 50 or 60, and instead of retiring from that job and from that work, you view that as an opportunity to serve others. And then when you're thinking about leaving that work, your calling doesn't end. Your calling to minister and be a disciple of Christ doesn't end with that job. It continues on. So instead of saying, hey, how can I get out of this job and how can I retire from this job? start asking God, what can I start focusing on and retiring to? What can I start being, how can I fulfill my calling in this life in whatever I'm doing, whether I'm working in the marketplace or whether I'm working in ministry, or if God has called me to something else, meaning maybe it's volunteering or starting a company or starting a business so that you can serve others and employ other people. So I hope that helped you redefine a framework of retirement planning. And so to answer the question, should Christians plan for retirement? I think there's wisdom in planning for the future, but I don't think we should view it as retirement in the way that Jesus talked about the parable of the man who built up storehouses because his soul was required of him that night. I think we should reframe our thinking to say, how can I view my work as my ministry for my calling that God's called me to? So if you enjoyed today's video, consider subscribing to the channel, like, and leave a comment. If there's something that spoke to you today, leave a comment below. I want to know your thoughts. Do you think that retirement planning is biblical? Thanks for watching and hope to see you in the next one.